Fear begins with me, each of you. Are you afraid of me? Are you afraid of the big black man that's standing in front of you? When you see my last name, do you understand that I'm more than just an image? Could you predict that my mother is white? There she is. If you can't tell, we have pretty striking resemblance. Could you understand that my father and mother had clashing cultures throughout my life that made it impossible for me to understand who I was from the very beginning? I remember my first day of kindergarten. I had this sense of pride. My father had this deep Ghanaian accent, and he always wanted me to understand where I came from. I was Ashanti, I was Ghanaian. I was more than just another person. And so when I walked in, I was excited. Just like any other 5-year-old child, I couldn't wait for my opportunity to start making friends and tell people all about who I was and how I liked to play. And so when it got to my turn to speak, I stood proudly. I said, "My name is Nanakwesi." And for a moment, I felt like I was on top of the world. But in the next moment, when another kid sitting right next to me pointed at me and said, "You're just an African booty scratcher," I immediately begun to break down. You see, I've lived in constant paranoia of not knowing who I am, of understanding my purpose, or understanding my ability to relay who I am past what I'm wearing. A constant paranoia of being pulled over by the wrong police. And so when I feel like I'm doing too much, it's really about protecting myself. This 3-piece suit is probably doing too much. But it was like a bulletproof vest for me. It made me feel comfortable. It made me feel as if you could just listen to me and not focus on the color of my skin. You see, my mother always called me Fuzzy Wuzzy, and I felt like a teddy bear. I mean, are you afraid of me? Do I look like a teddy bear, or am I a threat? I couldn't understand why just being from where I was, I didn't always fit in with everybody I grew up with. But very quickly, post-crack epidemic Washington, D.C. gave me tough skin. And so when I matriculated to 7th through 12th grade, along with the upper 10% of the entire United States in Washington, D.C. at the Murray School, I felt as if I had been hardened already. I felt as if I had a purpose and a mission. I had to infiltrate the system, and I had to make my way. You see, neither of my parents had gone to college, at least traditionally. My mother eventually did while taking care of her mother in her mid-20s. And so she went to college, and she also happened to be working at the same time. But for my family, this was an opportunity so amazing, so ridiculous, so unfathomable, that there were tears of joy. Tears of joy that were short-lived. And the reason was because I couldn't understand whether I needed to be Fresh Prince. How many of you here have watched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air? It's based the majority of it is based on the difference between two main figures, Will and Carlton. And Will happens to be from an underserved community of West Philadelphia, born and raised. And Carlton is of privilege and unable to really see the struggles that Will is going through until much later as the seasons continue to develop. And so I began to try to shield myself with things that my family couldn't afford. I had to have the polos. I had to dress preppy. I had to look like everybody else. And my family, quite frankly, couldn't afford it. But my parents made a way for me to feel comfortable, for me to have a shell, for me to feel that sense of pride that my father had tried to instill in me when he told me, "You're Ashanti, you're Ghanaian." And I remember very clearly, all of a sudden, I had all of these opportunities to do things that I wanted. I could sing in the choir, I could play sports. And one particular day, the beginning of the fall football season in 7th grade, I remember my little round self jogging out onto the field, super excited to be able to play sports in full attire. I mean, I'd been playing football in the street for years, just tossing a pigskin in between oncoming cars. But I finally had the opportunity to strap up, and I felt like I was going to make a huge impact on my life. I was headed to the NFL. But I was immediately defeated because my coach started to put pieces of tape on everybody's helmets, the backs of their helmets, so that he could remember our names. And in so doing, as you can see, my last name is pretty long, he started to write an acronym. First the O, then the W. And I thought, hey, is he going to call me Mr. O.W.? But he added the 2 E's at the end and began to, I guess, affectionately call me Owie. Now, most of the people that I went to high school and middle school with think of that term as affectionate. But it took me almost 12 years later to understand that I was different. I wasn't a Johnson. I wasn't a Thompson. I wasn't someone who they could relate to immediately. And so to be brought in, I had to be given a title. I wanted to be accepted. And as I continued to develop, I continued to understand that in order for me to be accepted, I had to start changing my identity. I had to be a different person than I was in my neighborhood. But I still had to be cool. And my father and I got into it severely so many times about me losing sight of who I was, where I was from, what the mission was at hand. Again, remember, no one in my family, in my nuclear family, had gone to traditional college. And so this was an opportunity that meant so much to our family, but at what cost? And so as I was making my way through, I would have these back and forths with my dad. I felt as if I was smarter. He didn't finish high school, so he could never help me with my homework. And my mother, who had a different culture and was much more understanding, had to supplement the cost of his disability. And so we were talking past each other just within our home. But when my father died when I turned 15, I was able to move past that towards the goal of getting to college. And I very clearly remember the day when I got the call from the Posse Foundation and Grinnell College letting me know that I had been accepted, that I would be on my way to school, full tuition taken care of. I've never cried more tears of joy in my life. And that moment forever shaped my ability to then embark on my true life. By the time I'd gotten to college, my sense of being, my purpose, my representation for my younger brother overshadowed all of the fears that I had of being able to fall in line with people who were pretty much sure that they were going to college their entire life. Plus, I'd gone to private school and had this sense of an ability to be able to actually speak with and dine with and play with and go to Harris with. Tons of different people from all over the world. And so when Senator Tom Harkin appeared on my campus, I wasn't afraid. I saw it as an opportunity. I began to have more and more of those opportunities, stacking them on top of each other. But I also began to understand that my duality was taking a new form. I was becoming the token black man. I was becoming that voice of diversity. The one that's always great to hear at the end of a conversation, but never in the middle. The ideas that would help to be more inclusive until they were too loud. But I also began to understand that I had a purpose. And the image of that plan and that purpose came through my inspiration to work for President Barack Obama. You see, I finally had someone to aspire to be like, another biracial African-American man who was well-educated and had beat the odds. And so I embarked on a whole journey of understanding this purpose in the position of wanting to be a public servant. And I took on the great opportunity of working for him in Dubuque, Iowa, shortly after graduating from Grinnell College, and truly began to understand just how much potential I had in bringing different types of people together for a common goal. You see, I had started to understand that my duality didn't have to be one of a dichotomy. I didn't always have to switch my personality. In fact, I could be both. And I started to punch in, started to code instead of code switching. So when Freddie Gray was killed mercilessly by police officers in 2014, I had the courage to lead a protest on the steps of the US House of Representatives with a number of other young people, old people, black people, white people, blue, purple, for this sense of connectedness towards human dignity. Black lives matter. My life mattered. But more importantly, I refused to sit on the sideline as I continued to see the recreation of the 60s. But furthermore, I had this interesting situation that I had to deal with individually. After all, I had made it so far out of my situation that how could I stop? I mean, this was an opportunity to get both publicity and conduct some public service. In fact, I can remember plenty of people who used it specifically for that. But I understood that my purpose was deeper than that. So I continued to ask myself, how do we grow? I mean, police brutality, racism, prejudice, those aren't new things. And I was fortunate enough to have been educated through a pretty liberal and social education that allowed me to understand that, equality existed. I mean, sometimes I ask myself how we could possibly still be fighting over a national anthem that celebrates slavery. I mean, it's in the third stanza, of course, that no one else really learns these days, but how far have we really come? You see, the problem begins with those who have and those who don't. And understanding our ability to get what we would like starts at a very fundamental level. We're supposed to be the best nation in the world, but 32 million adults in the US can't read. And in DC, where I'm from, 9% of true DC residents, which happen to be 75% students of color, don't even finish college in 6 years. I had an opportunity, but how would I move forth without looking back? And I also began to understand that I was up against a completely new beast. You see, the internet had given the younger generation this sense of an ability to make things happen at a much quicker pace. And so I had this frustration through social media, through Snapchat, through Facebook, this sense of purpose, this sense of urge that needed to be gratified instantly. And I would fight and I would toil with all kinds of people that I would work with or under because they looked at me as the short-sighted millennial. I mean, sure, my points were great, but how was I going to see things through? How could they possibly pass the torch to someone like me when they couldn't even retire? They were focusing on things like Social Security and IRAs, never quite thinking about investing into our bench, into our future. Moreover, how was I going to fight this chain of conservatism that I found myself falling into? How was I going to fight feeling better than the people that I had grown up with the community surrounding me constantly? But I began to understand that my opportunity was more than just for me. Someone else had invested in my human dignity. Someone else had seen me as more than just that little black boy, more than just the Ghanaian, more than the half-white male, more than a teddy bear, and even more than a threat. They understood that that dignity that they gave me, that I started to understand, that resonated within me, was a path to social mobility. And if my path could be created, so many other paths could be as well. And so my network began to expand. And even though I didn't start off having a Bentley or going on all the cool trips that all of my friends did, I had equity. I could see the playing field that I was working in, and I had opportunity. And I began to understand that with opportunity, I was using my duality in all of these different circles to bring people together, to innovate, to talk with each other with the intent of listening, but listening without a response. You see, I started to understand that I had directly benefited from equity. Sure, laws can be made that say that everybody can walk through the same doors. Laws can be made that ensure that every child has the opportunity to get to school. But what about all of the other things? What about all of the parents that can afford the tutors? What about all of the parents that are able to put their kids into karate and basketball and ballet and piano? Could those factors possibly add to social capital? Could those factors have been the difference between my success and so many who had not made it out of my neighborhood? But how do we advocate? So often our fear has us wearing an invisible cloak where we just want to make it through. At least that's how I feel. Where I want to be accepted, where I want to be seen even and on an even playing field, regardless of who else is with me. My mindset obviously changed, but so much of that unlearning and that hurt had to happen through my experiences. And so as I worked in electoral politics with all different types of people and worked as a legislative assistant on Capitol Hill, creating policies that I wanted to see come to fruition so that we could create better levels of equity, I started to ask myself, what can I do without a constituency? How do I stand up to a corporation or a PAC or international donors or billionaires or special interests that have nothing to do with human dignity, but simply restoration? You see, I started to understand that I was getting ahead of myself. I had to relearn and understand that our coexistence had to be more than tolerance. Our coexistence had to be one of collaboration. I'm of the firm belief that we are at a time in our life where our electoral process, our democracy, our freedom, our liberties, and our overall belief in our nation are at stake. You see, we can have the same outcomes that we've had for centuries and centuries, rolling our feet in the mud, trying to move something, like Fred Flintstone. Or we can start to have conversations that expose the truth of America. That the little black boy just might have ideas that the rich white boy doesn't, because I didn't have. And through that innovation, through those conversations, we can start to think about creating pathways to success. We can start to think about innovation and technology that will move us to a place where our respect for each other is truly based in our ability to perform. We can hover, we can float. We don't always have to walk. You see, I believe that deconstructing prejudices begins at home and in the school. But more importantly, it begins with neighbors having conversations with each other. And to take it a step further, every single one of you all who are listening have to ask yourself, have you ever been uncomfortable? When you're looking at someone who doesn't look the same as you, are you uncomfortable? Are you afraid? Those conversations are where we and lay the foundation for stronger conversations. And as we get older, we've got to understand that when we vote, it's not just about ticking a box. We have to hold our local elected officials accountable in order to have a rippling effect. The President of the United States has very little ability to control your life, but your city councilman, who you can push to sit in police meetings or kindergarten classes or local food banks or even homes for the aging, those are the people that can truly have an impact. Those are the people who can watch the investments that are being pulled together go to the right places, go to people and not institutions, and not buildings, and not based on your income. You see, community building can replace our fears with excitement. And I believe that if all of us remember that, we will start to form. We will start to place those who are unable to see on our shoulders so that that fence is even. And when enough of us stack each other on our shoulders, we can make a puncture from within. Thank you.